Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a recent reads video, which is, I think, my first one of the month, and it's October 23rd. So we have a lot of books to talk about. The first one I want to talk about is an audiobook that I completed close to the beginning of the month. And this was a romance that I read with Katie, and Doris was supposed to join us, but she was not able to, but she had already read the book anyway in the past. So the book is Mine Till Midnight by Lisa Kleypas. This is book one in the Hathaways series. And we chose this one at this time because it is set in the Victorian time period. And so we thought that would be appropriate since this is Victober. And we have liked Lisa Kleypas books in the past. So this series is all about the Hathaway family. In this first book, our main character is Amelia, who is the oldest sister of this group of siblings. They have lost their parents, and they have come into an unexpected inheritance. And so her younger brother is now some kind of titled aristocrat. And so their circumstances, while they had been brought up as sort of well-to-do, not well-to-do, but in the aristocracy, but not titled. But now they are into the elite of the aristocracy, and they're trying to navigate that world, which they had never expected to be a part of. There's lots of family issues here. And Amelia meets a man named Cam, who is of a gypsy background, but he is also very wealthy at this point in his life. He works as sort of the manager of a gentleman's club, and he is very close with various members of the aristocracy, and that's how Amelia meets him, and they find themselves in the same situation. And it was a very enjoyable read. I do like Lisa Kleypas. She writes really good sort of family romances where you get a lot of the sibling dialogues and how the siblings interact. I found that very enjoyable. The side characters, there were some characters from previous Lisa Kleypas books in this one that were great to revisit. But it is not a memorable story, and since I finished this at the beginning of the month, I'm not remembering a lot of the details. So this was an average romance read for me. The second book that I completed was a mystery, and this is A Suitable Vengeance by Elizabeth George. This is book 4 in the Detective Lindley series, which I am reading with Britta Bowler. And this is a prequel to the first 3 books. So 3 books, finding all about Detective Lindley, and his partner, Sergeant Havers. In this book, Suitable Vengeance, we go back in time to before the start of the first book and find out more about Lindley's background, his family, and how he became part of this close friend group with these 3 other characters that we've seen in the first 3 books. So Simon St. James, his wife Deb, and their friend Helen. So all 4 of these are the main characters of this book. There is a mystery, a murder takes place, and our 4 main characters are trying to figure out what happened. We don't really get to see much of Havers, just a brief glimpse of her towards the middle of the book. But it was great to get the backstory of these 4 characters that we've been following in the first 3 books, and to sort of understand how their dynamic came into play and was established. And also the mystery was really great in this one. Elizabeth George uses quite a few red herrings that were well placed and really sort of threw me off track. There's, quite a wide cast of characters and lots of different suspects in this one, and it all came together really satisfactorily at the end, and I really do enjoy Elizabeth George. I would say she's more of a slow burn mystery writer, more in the style of Louise Penny and that sort of book. If that's the kind of style of mystery you like, I think you should try Elizabeth George. The first book that I've completed for Victober is Far From the Maddening Crowd by Thomas Hardy, and I read this with a group of buddy readers that included Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, AJ Dunn from AJ Dunn Reads and Write, and another friend, Sonia, and we had a lovely discussion about this book. It really enhanced my enjoyment of it. I did really enjoy this story, which is the story of Bathsheba, a young woman who inherits a farm, and the 3 men who basically are a part of her life. And the three men all played sort of different roles. They're all interested in Bathsheba. And so they have different interactions with her. There is the first young man that she comes into contact, Gabriel Oak, who is a young farmer who loses everything and so ends up in a much lower social strata than Bathsheba. And then there is the neighboring farmer, Broad something, I cannot remember. Boldwood, Farmer Boldwood, who has the neighboring farm next to Bathsheba, and Sergeant Troy. And so we see how Bathsheba takes over this farm and begins to sort of take control of her own life in a way that was very unusual for young women of this time. I really liked the character of Bathsheba. I really admired her willingness to like step outside what society thought she should be or could be. I admired her determination to sort of run her own life. I didn't agree with all of the choices that she made in her life, but I thought that she really grew over the course of the novel from where she started out with as quite a young girl, at least seemingly acting like quite a young girl, to a very mature young woman who understood a lot more about life than when she started at the beginning of the novel. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and the buddy read was really great to pull out different things that I hadn't myself maybe noticed, or to talk about the characters, those four main characters. There is a wider cast of characters. Of course, there are the folks who work on the farm and the people of the community around Bathsheba's farm, and they provide a lot of comic relief. This is quite a funny novel, which was quite surprising because other than Anthony Trollope, I don't tend to associate humor with Victorian novels. So I really enjoyed this, and I thought that is probably the best. I think I've only read one or two other Hardy novels, and I think this one would be my favorite at this point. The next book I finished was Spillover by David Quammen. This is a nonfiction book all about zoonosis, which are diseases that cross over the boundary from animals into human populations. For example, Ebola, AIDS, and of course, coronavirus. And so this book predates coronavirus, but it is very prescient in terms of what it's talking about, sort of what the next big illness is going to be that crosses over from animal populations. The book also goes into sort of how we learned how viruses exist within animal populations and can be transferred into human populations, and looks at some of these different diseases that we now know a lot more about, and how they came from animal populations into human populations. David Quammen is an excellent science writer. He really describes things in a very clear and concise way. He's very engaging. He writes with a lot of heart, and I read this on ebook and I loved it, and I can't wait to read his new book, Breathless, which just came out, and is a book I think is entirely about coronavirus. So yeah, really excited to read that one, and really enjoyed Spillover. I mean, as much as I shouldn't probably say that, there were some parts that were really deeply disturbing, but for the most part, I really enjoyed the book. And then another buddy read that I completed was this one, In the Country of Others by Leila Slimani, and this is translated from the French by Sam Taylor. I buddy read this with Patrice, and this is the story of a young couple who are from two different worlds and get married and try to make a life for themselves in Morocco. So our young woman Matilda meets and marries Amina, her husband, when he is a soldier stationed in France during World War II. She travels back with him to Morocco to start life on a farm. He has inherited a farm from his father who has passed away. And it is the story of them trying to come to terms with each other, with this lifestyle of like running a farm and being farmers, how to navigate a world in which she is white and he is black, and political changes happening in the country of Morocco and what that's like. This book the themes are interesting. The characters are very well done, but there is not enough story in this book for me. I described this to Patrice as it felt very episodic to me. It just felt like we would get these, these anecdotes or these vignettes of little episodes that happened in the characters' lives, and then we would just move on, and there wasn't a lot connecting them to each other. I didn't feel like there was a plot line running throughout the book that could pull me along and into the story. So while I was reading it, I was enjoying it. I was invested in the characters, but I was not, when I set the book down, I was not inspired to pick it back up, or I was not, it wasn't calling to me when it was sitting on the table to pick up. So this is supposedly the first book in a 3-book series, and I am not sure that I would pick up the second book, not because I think this is a bad book. I don't think it's a bad book at all. I think Leila Slimani is an excellent writer. I just feel like if it's going to be written in the same style, it's just not something that I'm interested in, because there's just not enough story in this book for me. So yeah, but I am glad that I read it with Patrice, because we always have a good time when we buddy read. And then the next thing I completed was The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. I buddy read this with Britta. And so, yeah, you can see it's been a month of buddy reads for me. And this was something that we both really, really enjoyed. This is an excellent, excellent piece of narrative nonfiction, right up my alley, exactly the kind of book that I love. So this book tells the story of the young women who worked for companies in the early part of the 20th century, painting the dials of watches and gauges with radium paint. So the radium paint was luminous, and so you would be able to read these gauges or these watch faces in the dark. And so this was extremely popular at the time, and highly necessary for war efforts and things like that. So the companies would hire these very young women. I mean, and a lot of these young women were teenagers when they worked for these companies, like 14, 15, 16 years old. And of course, at that time, some things were known about radium, but it wasn't widely known that how dangerous radium was, and how impactful it could be. So the women would take the paint onto a paintbrush and then put the paintbrush in their mouths to point the brush and make the brush very pointed, so when they painted, they could be very detailed in their painting. And that is how they were instructed to put this paint on the watch faces and the dials. And of course, by ingesting the radium, they were poisoning themselves. And the outcome of that was that in some time period afterwards, they became ill with the effects of radium poisoning. And so this book, the first part, this divided into 3 parts. The first part talks about what the girls did when they were employed by these companies, and how that all came to be, and why they were employing young women at this time period. And then parts 2 and 3 talks about what happens after the injury has occurred to the girls. Because of course, at this time period, there was no workers' compensation for this type of thing. There were occupational health and safety was not a thing that existed in the world. There weren't government protections for workers who were working with dangerous materials or hazardous materials the way there is now. And so the court cases and things like that, what were the medical outcomes and the legal outcomes of these young women being impacted by their work. And it was incredibly, incredibly moving and interesting, and so well written to pull you along in the story. I cried. I can't tell you how many times I cried reading this book. And that's not particularly common. I mean, in memoirs, yes, I will cry, but for narrative nonfiction, I don't normally cry. But this book moved me so deeply. These women and their bravery in the face of certain death. They knew, in a lot of cases, they knew that once they found out what was making them sick, they knew that there was no cure and no help for them. And their bravery to endure and to sort of continue to work to make the companies and the government help them and to pay attention to this and to do it not only to help themselves, but to benefit future workers and to protect future workers. It was just a truly inspiring story, really well told. Really glad I read this. So excellent. I highly recommend, if you have not yet read The Radium Girls, pick it up. This would be a wonderful pick for nonfiction in November in the Element category. And then last but certainly not least was another, Radium Girls was a 5-star read. This was also a 5-star read for me. This is A Rip Through Time by Kelley Armstrong. This is a mystery novel, a historical mystery novel that was lent to me by my niece. And I had read Kelley Armstrong in the past. She has written a various urban fantasy series, and I used to read her back in the day, some of her urban fantasy stuff. But this book tells the story of, let me get her name right, Mallory, who is a detective in modern day Canada. She comes to Scotland to spend time with her grandmother, who is seriously ill and dying. And while she is in Edinburgh, she falls through time back to 1969 Scotland, Edinburgh, and into another body. And she wakes up and she's in this other body, and then she has to figure out what is going on. And so because she's a detective in the modern day, she falls into this household, which is very curious. The gentleman of the house appears to be an undertaker, but maybe is more than that. And there's a mystery to be solved. And so she's trying to pretend that she is a housemaid from 1869 and also solve these very curious mysteries that are happening. And so it's a great mystery as Mallory tries to figure out tries to track down some stuff about a murderer who's actively killing people in 1869, and also tries to figure out how to get back to her own time. And it's just a delight. It's so much fun to read. It is really, really just an excellently told mystery. I know I'm not a time travel person myself, but the time travel part is really not, the central aspect of this. The mystery is the central aspect of this. And I don't want to give anything away because it really is, there's a lot that goes on, and you really should read it yourself to get all of it. And I don't want to ruin anything for anyone, so I'm not going to talk about the plot any more than that. But the character of Mallory, I thought it's so interesting because here she's this 21st century woman in this historical time period where women did not have a lot of agency. And so she's trying to maintain this demeanor of a housemaid, or a demeanor that a housemaid would have in that time period, while also she's a person who's used to using her intellect to figure things out. And so she's using it not only to figure out how to live in this time period, but also figuring it out to solve a mystery. And it's just watching her work with these constraints upon her and using the information that she knows from the future. Fantastic, just fantastic. And the other characters that she encounters are also fantastic. And the way that this ends, there's going to be more in this series, and I can't wait. This just came out, I think, a couple months ago, and now I'm I want the next one to come soon so I can read more about Mallory and what she gets up to in 1869. So yeah, this was fabulous. If you like historical mysteries, I would highly recommend you give this one a try. If you like if you like the idea of exploring what it would be like for a modern woman to have to live in a time period where she's constrained by society to the extent women were constrained by society in the 1800s, I think this is also an excellent choice for you. So yeah, really, really love this one. Another 5-star read for me. So those are the books that I have read in the month of in the month of October and had not yet talked about on the channel. I hope that you found something within this group of books that sounds interesting to you. I hope that you're all doing well and finding some great books to read, and I will talk to you later.